Let me tell you something that nobody at the diplomatic corps ever expected to put in an official report. They have a phrase for it now, actually. When something goes catastrophically, hilariously, irrevocably sideways in an interspecies negotiation. When a human does something so unscripted and so human that the entire machinery of galactic diplomacy has to stop and recalibrate. They call it a Mercer incident. Named after me, Corporal Dax Mercer, formerly of the Terran Expeditionary Liaison Corps, currently listed in 7 separate galactic databases as consort claimed by royal decree, 3 databases as diplomatic asset, do not reassign, and 1 database, which I'm pretty sure belongs to the Velkari themselves, as claimed male, property of the Blood Throne, trespassers will be answered for. I did not intend any of this. I was tired, I was hungry. I was 3 shifts deep into a docking rotation that was supposed to have ended 6 hours ago, and I made a joke. That's it, that's the whole origin story. I made a joke in a crowded bay, and a 700-year-old vampire princess heard it, and she looked at me across 40 meters of pressurized atmosphere and recycled station air, and she said very quietly to her entire royal retinue, "That one he will do." I didn't even know she was there. I didn't even know she was real. Most humans in the Corps at that time thought the Velkari were a diplomatic myth, something the Galactic Council had invented to keep humans from pushing too far into the outer rim. We knew they existed, technically. We'd seen the communiques. We'd read the briefings. We just didn't think they actually showed up to places. They showed up. And when they do, they bring the kind of presence that makes you understand why every species in the galaxy gave them a wide berth and a very respectful amount of empty space. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Every good story needs to start at the beginning, and the beginning for me was a docking bay, a bad day, and the worst joke I ever made. The Crossroads wasn't a beautiful station. I want to be clear about that, because every documentary you've ever seen about the place makes it look like something out of a propaganda reel. All gleaming corridors and sweeping views of the transit lanes and species representatives walking in dignified procession toward meaningful summits. The reality was more like the world's largest, most chaotic bus terminal, except the buses were starships, and the passengers were anywhere from 3 inches to 40 feet tall, and some of them breathed ammonia. I'd been stationed there for 8 months. In that time, I had learned to navigate the lower docking rings by smell alone, because the signage in sectors 14 through 19 had been broken for 3 months, and the maintenance crew was backed up. I had learned that Krothe merchants did not appreciate you making eye contact during a price negotiation, but would be deeply offended if you looked away first, which made every transaction with them an exercise in staring at their chins. I had learned that the station's recycled air carried a faint metallic tang that you stopped noticing around week 3, and then started noticing again around week 20. But by then it didn't bother you the way it used to. I had also learned that the Terran Liaison Corps was, in the galactic diplomatic ecosystem, roughly equivalent to the intern who runs coffee. We were new. We were small. We were enthusiastic in a way that the older species found either endearing or alarming, depending on the species and the day. The Crossroads was where new species, or newly recognized species, which humans technically were, having only been officially registered with the Galactic Council 63 years prior, came to prove they could play well with others. Mostly we were doing fine at it. Mostly. From the personal log of Corporal Dax Mercer, Terran Liaison Corps. Day 247 at the Crossroads. Starting to think Lieutenant Vash assigned me to the lower docking rings as punishment for the Krothe situation last month. For the record, I maintain that making a joke about their cargo manifest was a completely reasonable human response to a completely unreasonable customs inspection. And if the Krothe wanted to file a formal grievance, they should have included the specific cultural context about humor and commerce in their diplomatic primer. Anyway, lower docks. Bay 19. We're expecting a diplomatic convoy from the Drevith Confederation, which means 6 hours of processing paperwork for a species that does not believe in digital signatures and requires every document to be countersigned by 3 witnesses, one of whom must be a non-aligned third party. That's me. I'm the non-aligned third party. I've been the non-aligned third party for 4 separate Drevith cargo declarations this week. My hand is tired. My back hurts. The air recycler in Bay 19 sounds like it's developing a personality disorder. I'm fine. Everything is fine. The shift in Bay 19 that day had started at 600 and was supposed to end at 1400. By 1800, the Drevith convoy was still 2 hours out, delayed by a transit lane dispute with a Crothay merchant caravan that had somehow escalated into a request for formal arbitration, which meant that everyone connected to the Drevith arrival, including me, was stuck waiting. The bay itself was a vast, cathedral-ceilinged space, one of the older sections of the station built when humanity still thought space stations needed to evoke grandeur rather than just function. The floor was a dark composite material that had been walked on by 100 species over 40 years and now had a kind of permanent shimmer to it, like something between stone and shadow. The lighting was adjusted to accommodate a dozen different visual spectrums, which meant it was never quite the right brightness for humans, always slightly too blue-white, with undertones that made everyone look a little dramatic. Docking clamps lined the far wall. 3 bays were active. One held a Virath cargo hauler, its hull covered in the bioluminescent markings that Virath ships used for internal navigation, and which absolutely no one had explained to human dockworkers, resulting in an incident 6 months ago that had caused 3 mild panic attacks and a strongly worded interspecies memo. Another bay held a Sulithian passenger vessel, modest and gray, its passengers long since disembarked. The third bay was empty, its space reserved for the Drevith convoy. I was sitting on a supply crate near the processing station, eating a protein bar that tasted exactly the way you'd expect a protein bar to taste after being in your jacket pocket for 4 hours, and talking to the 2 other humans on shift with me. Private First Class Lysa Ockhaffer, who had been with the Corps for 2 years, and had the calm, slightly thousand-yard look of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that their life was essentially a series of waiting rooms. And Specialist Brendan Chow, who was 22 years old, had been on the crossroads for exactly 3 weeks, and still found every aspect of alien species fascinating in a way that exhausted the rest of us, but was genuinely kind of charming. I'm just saying, Brendan was saying, not for the first time, the Virath navigation marks are beautiful. Like as an art form, they're not just practical there. They caused 3 people to have panic attacks, Lysa said. Well, yeah, but aesthetically. Brendan. What? Eat your protein bar. Brendan ate his protein bar. I leaned back against the crate and stared up at the ceiling of the bay, where the docking lights cycled slowly through their automated sequence, green, amber, and thought, not for the first time, about my choices in life. I was 29 years old. I had been the kind of kid who'd read every word ever written about the Galactic Council's first contact period, who'd grown up watching the feeds from the initial diplomatic exchanges, who had genuinely, sincerely wanted to be part of humanity's story in the wider galaxy. And here I was, in Bay 19, eating a protein bar, waiting to be a third-party witness to cargo declarations for a species that used documents so dense with ceremonial language that signing one felt like committing to a years-long relationship. You okay? Lysa asked, without looking up from her tablet. Tired, I said, which was true. You look like you're reconsidering your life. Little bit. Same, she flipped a page on her tablet. You know what would make this better? What? If someone brought me food. Hot food, food that didn't come from a pocket. Someone meaning a hypothetical someone, a partner, a spouse. She said it the way you say things when you've been staring at the same screen for too long, and your brain starts producing words independent of your actual desires. Someone who would look at this situation and say, Lysa, I have brought you hot food because I understand that you are suffering. Brendan laughed. Are you proposing to the concept of partnership right now? I'm proposing to the concept of hot food, she said. The partnership is just the delivery mechanism. I grinned, the kind of grin you produce when you're exhausted and slightly punchy, and the joke isn't even that funny, but you've been standing on composite flooring for 12 hours. I looked around the bay, at the vast, echoing space, at the docking clamps, at the Virath ship glowing softly in its berth, at the handful of other species personnel moving through their own tasks at the edges of the room. And then I did the thing that is now named after me, the thing that I maintain in the official record, was clearly a joke and should have been understood as such by everyone present. I threw my arms out, the universal human gesture of exasperated complaint, and I said loudly enough that it echoed off the bay walls. "That's it, I need a wife. Somebody, anybody, I need a wife, I need hot food, and I need to go home." Brendan lost it, full genuine laughter. Lisa looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who has witnessed something idiotic and is choosing to document it internally for later use. And I, satisfied with the laugh I'd gotten, started to lower my arms and go back to my protein bar. That was when the silence hit. Not the ordinary silence of an empty bay. Something else. Something that moved through the room like a pressure change, like the moment before a system alarm when the air itself seems to know something is wrong before the computers do. I noticed it first in Brendan, who stopped laughing very abruptly. Then in Lisa, who stood up slowly from her crate without looking away from something behind me. Then in the other personnel at the edges of the room, the Virath dock crew, the two Sulithian customs officers, the Krothite cargo rep who'd been arguing with someone on a comm unit for the better part of an hour, all of them going still. All of them looking in the same direction. I turned around. They came through a service corridor. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. Service corridors at the crossroads were maintenance access, not exactly dignified entry points for anyone, let alone a diplomatic party. But the Velkari hadn't used the main docking approach, hadn't filed an arrival notification, hadn't done any of the things that any diplomatic party was supposed to do when arriving at a registered transit station. They had simply appeared. 7 of them in total. 6 in formation, 2 flanking pairs and 2 rear guards, and 1 at the center. The 6 guards I registered first because they were impossible not to register. Velkari warriors stand between 2 and 2.5 meters tall. They're built like the universe's architects decided to see what would happen if they gave something vaguely human-shaped a complete structural overhaul, broader through the chest and shoulders than seems physically sustainable, with a stillness in their posture that isn't the stillness of calm, but the stillness of absolute readiness. They were wearing what I later learned was travel armor rather than ceremonial armor, which meant it was practical rather than decorative, and even so it was extraordinary. Layered composite panels in deep charcoal and silver that seemed to absorb the blue-white docking lights rather than reflect them. Their eyes were the thing people usually mentioned first in post-encounter accounts. Not red. That was a human myth about vampires that apparently persisted even when humans made contact with the actual species. The Velkari's eyes were silver. A light, clear, luminous silver, like moonlight had been made into irises. In the low light of the docking bay, they practically glowed. They were not looking at me yet. They were looking at the room, all 6 of them. The automatic, systematic threat assessment of a trained protection detail entering an unknown space. Within about 3 seconds of their appearance, I was fairly certain they had cataloged every living being in Bay 19, every possible exit point, and every object large enough to constitute cover. Then I looked at the person in the center. Here's the thing about writing accounts of the Velkari royal family. People always want you to be hyperbolic. They want you to reach for language that adequately conveys what it's like to stand in the same room as one of them, particularly one of the principal royals, who are apparently a different tier of presence even within their own species. I'm going to try to just tell you what I actually saw. She was tall, though not as tall as her guards, maybe a few centimeters over 6 feet. She was dressed in traveling clothes, not ceremonial robes, which was apparently unusual. The Velkari royals were known for treating every appearance as a formal occasion. But her clothes, even simple, had a quality to them that made everything around them look slightly inadequate. Dark, deep material that moved with her in a way that made you aware of physics in a new and slightly uncomfortable way. Her skin was the color of old marble, a cool, pale ivory with blue undertones in the shadows, the kind of complexion that photographic equipment consistently failed to render accurately, according to every documentary I've seen since. Her hair was dark, very dark, and simply arranged, pulled back, with a few strands loose in a way that managed to look completely undeliberate. And her eyes, silver like her guards, but a different silver, deeper, more layered, the kind of silver that made you think of still water on a cold night rather than moonlight, the kind that, when they fixed on something, when they fixed on you, produced the physical sensation of being assessed at a level that your conscious mind didn't have access to, like being read in a language you didn't know existed. She was, and I say this with the full understanding that it's going to end up in the official record, the most arresting person I had ever seen in my life. And I had spent 8 months at the crossroads, where you encountered extraordinary-looking beings from 24 species on a slow day. She walked into Bay 19 like she had always been there, like the bay had been waiting for her. And she had already stopped moving. And she was looking at me, not scanning the room, not assessing threats, not examining the facility. Looking at me, specifically, with that silver gaze fixed on a point approximately level with my jaw and an expression that I would describe, if I had to, as interested. The way a scientist looks at something unexpected in a Petri dish, except more composed, and more ancient, and slightly more terrifying. I became aware over the next few seconds of several things simultaneously. One, every other being in Bay 19 had stopped what they were doing and was now extremely still. 2, Brendan had gone from laughter to a silence so complete that I wasn't certain he was still breathing. 3, Lysa had quietly stood up and was now standing in a posture that I recognized from training as the core recommended position for unexpected high-level diplomatic encounters. Hands visible, weight balanced, expression neutral. 4, I was still holding my protein bar. I lowered the protein bar slowly. The princess, I didn't know she was a princess yet. I just knew she was something significant, tilted her head approximately 2 degrees. It was a small movement. It communicated volumes. One of her guards stepped forward. Not toward me, just forward, a slight shift that changed the geometry of the group without being overtly aggressive. When they spoke, it was in standard galactic, with an accent that had been described in briefing materials as archaic formal, but that sounded, to my ear, like someone who had learned the language when the language was young. You, the guard said, not loudly, not aggressively, simply precisely. The human who spoke. I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. That was, I started. Her Serene Highness has noted your declaration. Every nerve in my body went quiet. I started. Your declaration of need, she has considered it. I felt Lysa move slightly beside me. Felt, rather than heard, the extremely controlled breath she was taking. I think there may have been a miscommunication, I said carefully. I wasn't making it was a figure of speech, a human idiom, I was. The guard's silver eyes didn't blink. Her Serene Highness speaks 47 languages, the guard said, including 17 human dialects and 9 forms of human colloquial expression. She is aware of the concept of humor. A pause that felt geological. She has considered it and found the declaration acceptable regardless. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I had ever stood inside. From behind me, very quietly, barely a breath, Brendan Chow said, "Oh no." And from across the bay, having crossed perhaps 15 meters while I was busy having my worldview restructured, the princess stopped 2 meters in front of me. Up close, the silver eyes were even worse. Better, worse, both. She looked at me for a moment with the kind of patience that centuries apparently teach you. And then she said, in standard galactic so perfect it made the language sound like it had been invented specifically for this sentence. I am Seraphine, 3rd of the Blood Throne, I accept. I want to be very precise in my account, because I know Dax's version of events tends to smooth over certain details for the sake of the narrative. So let me be clear about what happened in the first 30 seconds after the princess spoke. Dax did not say anything. He opened his mouth. No words came out. He closed it again. He opened it again. Still nothing. He looked at me. I had no help to offer him. I was also processing the fact that a Velkari royal princess had just verbally accepted what she apparently interpreted as a marriage proposal made in a docking bay by a human liaison corporal who was eating a 4-hour-old protein bar. In my 2 years with the Corps, I had attended 3 cultural sensitivity briefings on the Velkari. I remembered 2 things from those briefings. 1, Velkari royalty do not lie, do not bluff, and do not use language casually. What they say is what they mean always. 2, a formal declaration made in the presence of Velkari witnesses, any Velkari witnesses, is considered binding under their cultural and legal framework. He had made a declaration in front of 6 Velkari warriors. I made a decision, at that point, to update my personal emergency contact information as soon as I had access to a terminal, and to consider whether my career trajectory might benefit from a reassignment request. Chapter 4, The Claim. From the official diplomatic incident report, filed by Lieutenant Commander Ravav Vash, Terran Liaison Corps. At approximately 1823 station time, an unscheduled arrival by a Velkari Royal diplomatic party triggered a series of events in Docking Bay 19 that required immediate escalation to the Corps Senior Diplomatic Liaison. The incident originated with a statement made by Corporal Mercer, which was interpreted under Velkari cultural protocol as a formal declaration of availability for bonding. Per our legal team's subsequent review of the Velkari cultural framework, see Appendix C, this interpretation, while unexpected from a human perspective, is consistent with documented Velkari social and diplomatic custom. The princess's formal response, witnessed by 6 members of her personal guard, constitutes what Velkari law recognizes as a preliminary claim declaration, which under their treaty obligations with the Galactic Council carries certain diplomatic protections and obligations for both parties. Corporal Mercer was not, at any point in his training, briefed on this specific protocol. This is an oversight the Corps will address in future orientations. Recommended action: treat as Class 7 diplomatic anomaly. Do not attempt to contest the claim through official channels without first consulting Velkari legal representatives, as this would constitute a diplomatic insult of considerable severity. Engage the Galactic Council's treaty office for guidance. The next 4 hours were the most disorienting of my life, and I had once spent 3 days on a Sulithian habitat ship, where the gravity plating was calibrated for beings who experienced a completely different relationship with vertical. Lieutenant Commander Vash arrived in Bay 1914 minutes after I sent the priority message, and I will say this about Vash. She was the most unflappable human being I had ever met, and she walked into that bay, took in the situation with a single visual sweep, and simply said, "Corporal Mercer, status report." I gave her the status report. She listened. Her expression moved approximately twice during the full account, once when I described what I'd said, and once when I described the princess's response. Then she looked at the princess. The princess, who had not moved from her position 2 meters from me, and who had spent the intervening 14 minutes in a silence so complete it had started to feel like a physical presence, like there was an additional thing in the room, occupying the space between us. "Your Serene Highness," Vash said. Her standard galactic was better than mine. "I represent the Terran Diplomatic Corps on this station. I would like to offer our formal respects and inquire whether we might discuss the events of the past several minutes." The princess looked at Vash. "The human male made a declaration," she said simply. "I accepted. The discussion is complete." Vash's expression moved for a 3rd time. "With respect," Vash said, "Corporal Mercer may not have been fully aware of the cultural implications of. His species' lack of awareness of our customs is a matter for your diplomatic training programs," the princess said, not unkindly, not harshly, simply precisely. "It does not alter the nature of the declaration or the response. We do not withdraw based on misunderstanding. That is not our custom." "I understand," Vash said. "However, human customs regarding—" "I am aware of human customs," the princess said. "I have studied them extensively. I am aware that human bonding declarations are typically preceded by a significant period of acquaintance. I am also aware that the declaration was made in an unusual context. For the first time since entering the bay, something shifted in her expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it, a quality of knowing something. I have made allowances for context. The acceptance stands." Vash looked at me. I looked at Vash. We had a full conversation in that look. It covered: "How did this happen? I don't know. What do we do? I don't know that either. Are you going to fix this? I'm trying. Is this actually legally binding? I'm looking into it. Am I going to be deployed to a Velkari palace? Please don't make me answer that right now." Then Vash looked back at the princess. "Would your Serene Highness be willing to accept an informal discussion while we notify the appropriate diplomatic channels?" The princess considered this for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I will speak with the human Corporal Mercer." Her eyes moved back to me. "Walk with me." I looked at Vash. Vash made the smallest possible hand gesture that translated to "go." I went. We walked along the upper observation deck of Docking Bay 19, which had a transparent panel running the full length of the wall overlooking the transit lanes. You could watch ships coming in and going out, their nav lights tracing patterns through the dark. Two of her guards followed at a distance. The other four, apparently satisfied that I wasn't a threat, had taken positions around the lower bay. She walked the way everything about her seemed to operate, with an economy of motion that suggested she'd had centuries to figure out exactly how much effort anything required, and she deployed precisely that much and nothing else. I walked beside her feeling like I had 14 extra limbs and wasn't sure what to do with any of them. "You are nervous," she said. It wasn't a question, it wasn't unkind. It was, again, simply precise. "Yes," I said. "This is reasonable." She glanced at the transit lanes. "I am aware that my kind produce this response in most species. It is not a quality we cultivate deliberately, though I understand it can be useful strategically." I thought about the right thing to say, went through several options. Settled on honesty, because I had a feeling she'd see through anything else. "I genuinely didn't know you were there," I said. "When I said what I said, I wasn't making a declaration. I was making a bad joke because I'd been on shift for too long and I was tired and complaining." "Yes," she said. "You know that." "Yes. And you still." "Yes." She stopped walking and turned to look at me directly. This close, the silver of her eyes had depth to it that the distance hadn't shown, layers like something built up over time rather than simply colored. "You want to understand why. Humans always want to understand the mechanism, the reasoning." "Is that a bad quality?" "No," she said, and something in the word had warmth in it that surprised me. "It is one of your better ones." She held my gaze for a moment. "You want me to tell you that I made a mistake, that this is a misunderstanding that can be neatly resolved, that we will reach a polite diplomatic conclusion and you will go back to your protein bar and I will continue to wherever I was going." I didn't say anything. "I cannot tell you that," she said. "Not because I am inflexible, because it would not be true." She looked back at the transit lanes. "I have attended 600 years of diplomatic functions, Corporal Mercer. I have been in the presence of every significant species in this galaxy. I have met rulers and warriors and scientists and artists and beings whose existence my own kind had not imagined." A pause. "In that time, I have seen perhaps a dozen moments that could accurately be described as surprising. And this is one of them." "You are one of them." She looked at me again. "A human male in a functional docking bay, tired and cold and still eating inadequate nutrition, throws his arms open to an empty room and demands that the universe provide him with partnership and warmth. Not because he means it, because he doesn't know how else to say that he is lonely and overextended and still trying." She let that sit. "My kind reads the space between words as clearly as the words themselves. What you said was a joke. What was underneath it was not." The observation deck was very quiet. The transit lanes moved beyond the panel, ships coming and going, nav lights in the dark. "That's," I started, stopped. "That's a significant amount of reading from one sentence." "Yes," she said. "I'm not sure I don't know if that's accurate." "No," she said, with the certainty of someone who has had 600 years to learn the difference between what they know and what they're guessing. "But it is not inaccurate." I didn't have an answer for that. After a moment she said, in a tone that was slightly different, less formal, less precise, with something that might have been in a different register, almost gentle, "I do not expect this to be simple. My kind's customs are not designed for simplicity. I am aware that you have approximately no context for what has happened today. I am also aware that the Galactic Council and your core leadership will be deeply uncomfortable for the foreseeable future." The smallest possible movement crossed her expression. "I find, to my own mild surprise, that I do not care about any of that as much as I expected to." I thought about that for a long time. Finally I said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "In 600 years, did you have a—" I was not, it turned out, equipped for this particular sentence. "No," she said quietly, "I have not." "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that wasn't evasion but consideration, weighing exactly how much to say and to whom. "Because," she finally said, "no one has surprised me. Delegate Chen Park had been with the Human Diplomatic Assembly for 19 years. In that time, she had negotiated 3 separate resource treaties with the Krotha Confederacy, each one more complicated than the last, brokered the Sulithian Cultural Exchange Program that had resulted in 14 years of mostly successful interspecies coexistence, and once, memorably, talked down a Virath trade captain from declaring economic war on the entire human species over a navigational misunderstanding. She had, in short, dealt with difficult situations. This one, she would say later, was different. Not because it was more dangerous. It wasn't technically. No one was threatening war. No resources were at stake. No treaty obligations were being actively violated. It was different because it was entirely outside the diplomatic playbook. Every protocol she had for managing interspecies interactions assumed that interactions began in managed, structured environments. Formal meetings, controlled introductions, prepared statements. Nobody had written a protocol for a junior corporal, accidentally triggering a Velkari Royal Claim declaration through a joke in a docking bay. "Let me make sure I have the full picture," she said, in the tone of someone who wanted very much for the picture to be different. She looked at Harith, the Velkari liaison, a composed individual of middle years who had a quality of perpetual serenity that was either calming or deeply unsettling depending on the moment. Her Serene Highness heard the human statement and interpreted it as a formal declaration of availability. She interpreted it accurately, Harith said, with the particular precision that seemed to be a Velkari linguistic default. The human declared a need for partnership in the presence of Velkari witnesses. This constitutes a preliminary bonding declaration under our cultural framework. It was a joke, Chen Park said carefully. She is aware of this. As I understand it, she considered the humor and found the underlying communication. Harith paused briefly. Authentic. Chen Park looked at Arbiter Kloss, who had the expression of a being who was very glad this was not their species' problem. "What are the implications," Chen Park said, "of her acceptance?" In practical terms, Harith said, Her Serene Highness has placed a formal claim on the human male. This is recognized under Galactic Council Treaty Article 17, Paragraph 4, which covers binding social declarations made in the presence of recognized treaty signatory witnesses. A pause. The Velkari signed the Crossroads Station Treaty 11 years ago. Their personnel on the station at the time of the declaration constitute recognized witnesses under that treaty. Silence. What, Sub-Arbiter Vine said slowly, does a claim declaration actually mean, in terms of the human's status? It means, Harith said, that under Velkari law, the human is under Her Serene Highness's protection. He cannot be reassigned, prosecuted, harmed, or significantly displaced without her formal consent. It also means he is considered a candidate for formal bonding, what humans would call marriage, though the full bonding requires additional ceremonies and is not considered complete at this stage. Chen Park sat back. "And if we contest the claim," she said, "you would be contesting a Velkari royal declaration made in the presence of witnesses," Harith said. "Under our law, this would constitute a formal diplomatic insult to the princess personally and to the blood throne by extension." Another pause. "I would not recommend this course of action." What would the consequences be?" Harith considered this. "The Velkari have not formally gone to war in 300 years, he said. "We do not, as a rule, resolve diplomatic insults militarily. We resolve them through a combination of social, economic, and," another brief pause, biological pressure. He looked at the assembled diplomats with his perfectly calm silver eyes. "We are very patient and very thorough, and we have very long memories." The silence that followed this statement was comprehensive. "So," Chen Park said at last, in the measured tone of someone constructing a path through a situation that had no good exits, "what you're telling me is that we can't refuse the claim, we can't contest it, and we need to find a way to handle this that doesn't trigger 600 years of biological pressure from the most powerful royal house in the Outer Rim." "That is a reasonable summary," Harith said. Chen Park looked at the ceiling of the briefing room for a moment. Then she said, "Get me Corporal Mercer." From my personal log, day 247 continued. "They're sending me to talk to the treaty office. Vash gave me the briefing document. I read the briefing document. I read it twice. Brendan brought me another protein bar. He looked like he didn't know whether to apologize or ask for my autograph. I ate the protein bar. The Drevith convoy arrived while I was reading the briefing document, and someone else signed the cargo declarations. I don't even know who. Apparently my existence briefly took precedence over Drevith paperwork, which is the most unprecedented thing that has ever happened at this station. I'm going to go talk to the treaty office now. The treaty office briefing room was on level 7, neutral territory, designed to feel like no species' home turf, which meant it felt like everyone's slightly uncomfortable living room. Round table, ambient lighting calibrated to a diplomatic middle ground that worked for 8 different visual spectrums, and was perfect for none. Chairs that had been designed to be adjustable for a variety of body types, and succeeded mainly in being adjustable in every possible direction without being quite right for any of them. Delegate Chen Park was already there when I arrived, along with the Velkari liaison Hareth, Subarbiter Vine, and a Drevith legal representative who I suspected was there mainly because Drevith never missed a meeting where documents might be generated, and who looked mildly disappointed that there weren't more forms involved. And sitting at the far curve of the table, with 2 of her guards standing behind her and the particular stillness she seemed to carry everywhere like a personal atmosphere. Princess Seraphine. She looked at me when I walked in. I sat down. Chen Park, to her considerable credit, did not waste time on preamble. Your Serene Highness, she said, we appreciate your willingness to discuss this situation. We want to begin by expressing our respect for your cultural framework and our understanding of the serious nature of the declaration and its acceptance. We'd like to understand what you're hoping the next steps look like. The princess looked at Chen Park with the attentive patience of someone who has sat through 600 years of meetings and has learned to listen for the real question inside the polite question. You want to know my intentions, she said. Yes, Chen Park said. They are the same as they were when I spoke in the docking bay, the princess said. I have accepted the declaration. I intend to honor that acceptance. I am aware that the human male, Corporal Mercer, was not making a deliberate declaration. I have taken this into account. I am not proposing to compel anything. A pause. I am proposing to allow the natural process of acquaintance to proceed. Acquaintance, Chen Park said carefully. Yes, what humans call, the smallest movement in her expression, getting to know each other. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. I wasn't sure what. And in the meantime, Chen Park said, the claim stands, the princess said simply. As a protection, not a constraint. He is under my protection. He cannot be harmed, reassigned without my knowledge, or placed in situations of undue risk without my... A careful pause, significant objection. Chen Park looked at me. I looked at the princess. She was looking at a point slightly to the left of the table's center, with the expression of someone who had already done the calculations for this conversation 3 moves ago, and was simply letting it arrive at its natural conclusion. Can I say something? I asked. Every person and being at the table looked at me, including the princess, whose silver gaze moved to me with a kind of focused attention that I was starting to recognize. The way she looked at you when she was actually listening, which was different from the polite attention she gave to everything else. Yes, she said. I thought about what I wanted to say, thought about it carefully. This was the treaty office. This was being recorded. This was going to be in the official record. I'm not angry, I said. I want to be clear about that. I don't feel like I've been wronged. You heard something and you responded honestly to what you heard, and I can respect that even if I didn't intend it. I paused. But I need to understand what this actually means for me, not legally. Not diplomatically. For me as a person. Because the way you explained it in the bay, what you said you heard under the words, I stopped. Go on, she said quietly. You were right, I said. About the underneath part. I was tired and I hadn't talked to anyone outside of this station for 8 months, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to be somewhere that felt like home. And I made a joke about it because that's what people do when they can't say the real version of something. I looked at her directly. But being right about that doesn't mean this is. It doesn't automatically mean that what you're proposing is. No, she said, it doesn't. Her voice was even, but there was something in it that I hadn't heard before, a careful quality, like something being handled. I am not asking you to believe that what I felt in that moment constitutes a foundation for anything permanent. I am asking you to believe that it constitutes a foundation for a conversation. She met my eyes. I have lived 600 years without having that conversation. I am asking for time to have it. The room was very quiet. Chen Park was watching me with the careful, neutral expression of a diplomat who knew better than to intervene in this particular moment. The Drevith legal representative appeared to be writing something down, possibly out of professional habit. I looked at the princess for a long moment. "How much time are we talking?" I said. And there it was again, that almost thing. That adjacent to amusement quality that moved across her expression and was gone before you could properly see it. "In Velkari terms," she said, "very little. And in human terms, perhaps significantly more." I thought about Bay 19, about 12 more hours of the recycled air and the Drevith declarations and the protein bars and the blue-white lights cycling green, amber, about 8 months gone and no clear picture of the months after. About throwing my arms open to an empty room and asking the universe for something and the universe in its spectacularly, catastrophically unsubtle way, apparently answering. "Okay," I said. Chen Park's expression moved slightly. "Okay," the princess said. "Okay," I said, "time to have the conversation. But I have conditions." Something sharpened in her attention. Interest, I was starting to realize, looked different on her than it did on anyone else. On her it was a focusing, a slight contraction of attention, like a lens adjusting. "State them," she said. "I'm not leaving the Corps," I said. "Not immediately, not without a lot more conversation first." "Acceptable. I'm not going anywhere I haven't agreed to go. No surprise deployments, no being placed on a Velkari ship while I'm asleep or something. We do not relocate individuals without their knowledge. We are not," a measured pause, "pirates." "I know, I just wanted to say it out loud." I paused. "And I want to know about you, not the diplomatic version, not the treaty language, you. Because if we're going to have a conversation, it should be an actual one." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any that had come before. Then quietly she said, "That is acceptable." And I thought, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And then, but I said that, and she's still sitting there, and her eyes are doing the thing where they look like still water, not threat assessment. And then, quietly, in the part of my brain that I should probably have listened to earlier, maybe that's enough to start with. I feel I should note, for the court's records, that in 600 years, Her Serene Highness has never voluntarily stopped moving for more than 14 minutes in a station common area to look at any one thing. She stood in that bay for 47 minutes. I thought the court should know. The next 2 days at the crossroads were, professionally speaking, a complete mess. The Drevith convoy finally arrived and completed their cargo declarations, which I was not present for, which generated 3 separate formal inquiries from the Drevith legal team about whether the non-aligned third-party witness had been replaced, and whether the replacement's non-aligned status could be verified, because the Drevith took their paperwork very seriously, and any variation in documented procedure required documentation of the variation. The Crothay merchant who'd been arguing on his comm unit when the princess arrived somehow found out about the incident, and attempted to file a dispute with the Galactic Council, claiming that the emotional disturbance caused by the princess's unexpected arrival had compromised his negotiating position during a pending trade discussion, which Vash dispatched with elegant firmness in about 20 minutes. 2 other Velkari ships arrived in transit at the station, which had never happened before. The crossroads had maybe seen 1 Velkari vessel per year, and the docking crew spent most of one shift trying to figure out whether this was related to the princess's presence or a coincidence, before concluding that it was probably both. And I, Corporal Dax Mercer, spent 40 minutes every evening in a small conference room on level 4, talking to a 600-year-old vampire princess over a table with 2 cups on it. 1 cup of something dark and warm that I was pretty sure wasn't tea, but that she held with both hands and sometimes looked into the way people look into fireplaces when they're thinking. And 1 cup of coffee, station coffee, which was terrible, but which she had asked about after I mentioned it on the 2nd day. "What is it that you do before the shift starts?" she asked. Not small talk, not exactly. She asked questions the way a cartographer maps terrain carefully with an eye toward understanding the whole shape of something. "I have coffee," I said. "Terrible station coffee. But it's still coffee." You value it despite its quality. I value the ritual of it, I think, though it's something that's mine in a place where not a lot of things feel like mine yet. She looked at me. Show me, she said. So the next evening I brought 2 cups. Mine, black. Hers, which I made the same way because she hadn't specified, which she accepted and considered for a long moment before tasting, and then said with her usual precise honesty, "It is not pleasant." "No, but I understand what you meant about the ritual." She looked at the cup. "We have something similar, a preparation ceremony. It takes 40 minutes and involves 3 specific vessels that belong only to the individual who uses them. It is conducted at dawn." A pause. "I have not had occasion to conduct it in some time." "Why not?" "Dawn for my kind is typically," she considered the word, "observed differently than for humans. It is not usually a time of personal ritual. It is usually a time of transition and assessment." She looked at the coffee again. "I think I may have traded the ritual for the assessment without noticing." "I thought about that." "You've been doing the job," I said, "and not doing the other thing." "Yes. Is the job good?" A long pause. "It is important," she said, which was not, I noticed, the same thing. "But is it?" "It is what I am," she said quietly. "The question of whether it is good is," she stopped, started again. "Humans separate the self from the role more readily than my kind does. For the Velkari, particularly the royal family, the role is the self. The expectation was placed before the person who would inhabit it. That sounds, I thought about the right word, lonely." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it is an accurate word." We sat with that for a while. Then I said, "What were you doing here at the crossroads before the bay?" "Transit," she said. "I was traveling to the council's annual review meeting. I typically arrive early and spend time on the station observing." She tilted her head slightly. "I find that watching how different species behave when they are not performing for one another is more instructive than any formal briefing." "So you were watching the bay?" "I was passing through the service corridor adjacent to Bay 19, yes." "And you heard me?" "I heard you," the almost amusement thing. "You have a voice that carries." It echoed, I said. "The bay has bad acoustics." "Yes," she said, "and yet." 3 days in, and I'm beginning to think this situation is going to teach us something. Not something comfortable. Something about the difference between how we thought interspecies relations worked and how they actually work when you strip away the formal layer. We've spent 63 years doing everything right. Every meeting in the appropriate room, every declaration in the appropriate language, every gesture reviewed by cultural advisors before it was made. We have been so careful. And then one corporal, tired and hungry, opened his arms in a docking bay and asked the universe for something. And the universe, or at least one specific representative of the universe, said, "Yes, I see that, I answer." I think we may have been more focused on saying the right things than on actually saying things. I'm going to recommend, in my quarterly report, that we revisit our approach to informal interspecies contact protocols. I think we've been treating the informal as a risk rather than as a channel. Corporal Mercer, meanwhile, appears to be handling this with more grace than I would have predicted from his file. His file describes him as personable but occasionally impulsive, which, in retrospect, seems accurate. I'm not sure he knows what he started. I'm not sure any of us do. On the 4th day, one of her guards approached me in the corridor outside the conference room. This was the guard who had spoken in the bay on the 1st day, the one who had told me the princess had noted my declaration. Up close and in a quieter context, he was even more impressive than he'd been in the bay. The height, the stillness, the silver eyes with their quality of comprehensive awareness. His name, I would later learn, was Korvath. He had been with the princess's personal detail for 40 years. "Corporal," he said. I stopped walking. "Commander Korvath." He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was genuinely unreadable. Not hostile, not friendly. Something in between, which from him felt like a kind of respect. "You have been conducting yourself appropriately," he said. "Thank you," I said, slightly unsure what the appropriate response to that was. "She has not slept," he said. I processed that. Is that unusual? "The Velkari do not require sleep as humans do," he said. We have periods of deep rest that serve the same function. She has not entered rest since the station. A pause. In 40 years, I have not seen this more than twice. I thought about what that meant, felt the weight of it. What were the other 2 times? I said. He looked at me steadily. The first was when her father died, he said. The second was when she was given the emissary commission and understood that she would be traveling for the foreseeable future with no fixed home. The corridor was quiet around us. Station sounds, distant mechanical hum, the vibration of the transit lanes, the recycled air moving through vents. She's thinking, I said finally, not a question. She is, he said. She is processing. It is unusual for her. She is accustomed to clarity. He looked at me with those precise silver eyes. You have introduced a variable that does not resolve neatly. I didn't mean to. Yes, he said. She knows this. It is in part why the variable does not resolve neatly. He inclined his head very slightly, not a bow, not quite, but something adjacent, and walked past me. I stood in the corridor for a while after he was gone. Then I went and got 2 cups of terrible station coffee and sat in the conference room and waited. She came in 11 minutes later. She sat down, she looked at the cup, she looked at me. Korvath told you, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He is protective, he does not usually. He was warning me, I said. Gently, he was telling me to understand what was at stake. Her expression shifted, not the almost amusement, something quieter. For her or for you? I think both, I said. I think he was saying that if this goes wrong, if I'm careless, the cost isn't just embarrassment. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. It is the one thing I have not been careful enough to protect against, she said quietly. Myself. I looked at my coffee. She looked at hers. Can I tell you something? I said. Yes. The thing I said in the bay, the real version of it under the joke. I looked at her. I think I'd mostly forgotten that I was allowed to want it. Being here, the station, the work, the schedules, it's good work and I chose it and I don't regret it. But at some point I stopped thinking of myself as someone who gets to come home to someone. I just shelved it, like it was a thing for later, and later kept moving. She listened, the way she always listened, completely. The way that made you feel like the words actually landed, rather than passing through someone on the way to a response. And then you made a joke about it, she said. And then I made a joke about it. Because humans convert the unbearable into the comedic, she said, not dismissively, with something that sounded like recognition. How do Velkari handle it? She looked at the coffee for a moment. We become very efficient, she said. I laughed. It was a real one, not the performed laugh of a docking bay trying to lighten a 12-hour shift, but a real one, small and quick and completely genuine. It surprised me as much as it apparently surprised her, because she went very still for a moment, the way she went still when something landed unexpectedly. Then very quietly she said, "That was..." "What?" She looked up. Her eyes were doing the still water thing, the deep version. "The first time I have heard a sound like that in a very long time," she said. "That I generated, something in another person." I looked at her. She looked at me. Outside, in the transit lanes, a ship moved through the dark with its nav lights trailing. It has now been 7 days since what the Galactic Council's treaty office is officially calling a Class 7 diplomatic anomaly, though the corridors of the Crossroads station have their own, more colorful name for it. Reports confirm that Her Serene Highness Seraphine, 3rd Princess of the Velkari Blood Throne, and one of the most significant diplomatic figures in the Outer Rim, has formally claimed Corporal Dax Mercer of the Terran Liaison Corps as a bonding candidate following an incident in Docking Bay 19. The specifics of what triggered the claim remain a matter of some speculation. The Terran Corps has released only that it involved a conversational exchange, but sources within the station confirm the claim is legally registered with the Council's treaty office and has not been contested by the Terran Diplomatic Assembly. Meanwhile, the human diplomatic community has responded with what can only be described as a very human mixture of pride, confusion, and furious policy revision. We have confirmed reports that the Corps Cultural Protocol Division has been in emergency session for 5 days and has produced 17 new briefing documents, at least 3 of which apparently contain the phrase, Do not say things you do not mean in the presence of species who mean everything they say. The Velkari blood throne has, characteristically, said nothing publicly. The princess remains on the crossroads. The human remains on the crossroads. And the station itself, which in its 42-year history has hosted first contacts, trade disputes, and one memorable incident involving a Virath cargo captain and a malfunctioning gravity field, appears to have added another chapter to its considerable mythology. This is Prelin for GNN Outer Rim Bureau. Testimony of Specialist Brian Chow. Filed informally with the Core Cultural Exchange Documentation Project. Okay, so I know I'm not supposed to editorialize in these things, but I've been asked to give my account of the full 7 days, and I can't do that without saying, I was there for all of it. All of it. And I want to tell you something that nobody's talking about in the official reports. The way he was after that second day, after their first real conversation. I've known Dax, Corporal Mercer, for the 3 weeks I've been on this station, which I know isn't long, but I pay attention to people. It's a thing I do. On day 1, he was shell-shocked. Obviously, who wouldn't be? But day 2, he came out of that conference room and he looked, I'm going to use a word that's going to sound weird and I'm using it anyway, lighter. Like something he'd been carrying had been acknowledged. Not solved, not fixed, but seen. And I think that's actually the thing. I think the princess didn't fall for the joke. I think she fell for the fact that he didn't even know he was showing something real. And that for her, after 600 years of people performing themselves at her, someone accidentally being real was. I don't know, I'm 22. What do I know about 600-year-old beings and what they're looking for? But I know what I saw on his face when he came out of that room. And I've seen it on people before, on humans, and it means. Someone looked at me and they understood what I meant. That's all, that's my account. In week 2, I was given a formal diplomatic briefing by Chen Park, who sat across from me in her office and explained, with the measured precision of someone who had spent 2 weeks constructing a framework from a situation that had no existing template, what the options were. The Velkari claim is registered, she said. It cannot be undone without contesting it, which we're not going to do, so what we're looking at is what happens next. What are the options? 3, she said. 1. The princess allows the claim period to expire without proceeding to formal bonding. Under their law, the claim can be maintained for up to 3 years before it requires either progression or formal dissolution. Dissolution, at the princess's discretion, carries no penalty for either party. It would simply end. Okay, I said. 2. The claim progresses toward formal bonding. This is a long process under Velkari law, multiple stages, multiple ceremonial requirements, at least 2 years even in an expedited form. It would require significant renegotiation of your core status and potentially your citizenship categorization, since married into a Velkari royal house creates some interesting jurisdictional questions that the council's legal division is, I'm told, not sleeping very well over. And 3. Chen Park looked at me steadily. 3 is the one nobody expected, she said. The princess has submitted a proposal to the council's treaty office. She's proposing to create a formal interspecies liaison position, a new category, one that doesn't currently exist. A human liaison to the Velkari blood throne, not a consort, not a bonded partner. An independent diplomatic position, with full core standing and Velkari guest status protections, that would allow extended contact between the claim parties while the claim period runs its course. She paused. Under her proposal, you would continue to serve the core. You would additionally serve as an official point of contact between the core and the Velkari Royal Diplomatic Mission. It would be unprecedented. It would create a lot of paperwork. And it would give both parties time and legitimate context for whatever this is. I sat with that for a moment. She thought of this, I said. She submitted it 4 days ago, Chen Park said. Fully drafted, the legal framework, the jurisdictional resolution, the precedent citations, all of it. A pause. The Velkari diplomatic team says she drafted it in 1 sitting. I thought about the conference room, the 2 cups, the station coffee she didn't like but drank anyway, the 47 minutes in the bay. She's protecting the out, I said. Chen Park tilted her head slightly. What? The proposal, it's not just a way to move forward. It's a way to make sure I have one if I need it. Independent standing, full core status. The claim doesn't trap me, it just exists alongside a legitimate equal position. I looked at Chen Park. She's making sure that whatever happens, I have somewhere to stand that isn't contingent on her. Chen Park was quiet for a moment. That is, she said carefully, a generous reading. Am I wronged? She looked at her desk, then at me. No, she said, you're probably not. I thought about 600 years, about becoming very efficient, about the dawn ceremony she'd stopped doing because she'd traded the ritual for the assessment, about Korvath standing in a corridor telling me she hadn't slept, and that the last time it had happened was when she'd been given the commission that sent her away from home. I want to take the third option, I said. Chen Park looked at me. You understand that this is unprecedented, that your career trajectory will be significantly impacted, that you will be, for the foreseeable future, a diplomatic curiosity that every species in the galaxy is going to have strong opinions about. I've been a curiosity since Bay 19, I said. At least now I'd be a useful one. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I'll begin the formal acceptance process. She was in the observation corridor on level 9 when I found her that evening, standing at the transparent panel looking out at the transit lanes, the same view as the upper deck of Bay 19, but cleaner, wider, more of the dark visible and more of the lights. I stood beside her. She didn't turn. You accepted the proposal, she said. How did you know? Harith sent me a note, a pause, he is efficient. Option 3, I said, your option. Yes. You built in the out, I said. You made sure I had independent standing. You made sure the claim couldn't be used as a mechanism to. You noticed that, she said. Yes. She turned to look at me then. The silver eyes in the corridor light, cooler, quieter than the bay's blue-white. The expression that was not unreadable I had learned, but required a different vocabulary to read. A vocabulary I was still learning. Why, I said. She considered the question for a moment. Because, she said quietly, a thing obtained by constraint is not the thing I am interested in obtaining. What I heard in that bay was genuine. What I accepted was genuine. What I want, she paused. A careful pause of the kind that I'd started to recognize as the place where she moved from formal precision to something more personal. What I want is for whatever happens between us to be genuine, in both directions, and genuine things require freedom to exist. They require the possibility of the other outcome. I looked at her. She looked at me. Outside, a ship came in on the transit lane, its nav lights gold and blue and steady. I want to tell you something, I said. Yes. I've spent 2 weeks thinking about the joke, I said. About why it landed, why you stopped. I've had a lot of theories, the novelty factor, a human doing something unexpected. The cultural curiosity, a new species with new behaviors. The sheer statistical improbability of the moment. And, she said, and I think all of those are true, I said. I think all of those are part of it, but I also think, I stopped, organized the words carefully. I think that someone who has spent 600 years being entirely deliberate saw something entirely undeliberate, and it was remarkable, not because it was good or wise or appropriate, because it was real, unperformed, just someone being human at a moment when they didn't know anyone important was watching. She was very still. And I think, I said, that you've been watching people perform for a very long time. A long silence. Then very quietly, yes. And you're tired of it. Another silence. Yes, she said, not formally, not diplomatically, just yes. The words stripped of ceremony. Me too, I said, for different reasons, but the feeling is the same. She looked at me with those silver eyes that had depth like still water, and I thought, this is the most unusual thing that has ever happened to me, and I am not entirely sure what comes next, and I am less afraid of that than I expected to be. What do we do now? She said. I think, I said, we have more coffee. Something moved through her expression that was clearer than anything I'd seen before. Still not quite a smile. The Velkari, I'd learned, expressed amusement differently than humans in the quality of attention rather than the shape of the mouth, but something unmistakably warm, unmistakably real. The terrible station kind, she said. The terrible station kind, I agreed. The position generated 47 formal requests from other species, for similar framework consideration in the following 2 years. The Council's treaty office processed 31 of them before restructuring its intake procedures. The Velkari Blood Throne, in its first public statement regarding the incident, released the following 3 sentences. Her Serene Highness acted in accordance with our custom and law. The human conducted himself with appropriate dignity. We consider the matter resolved. This was considered, by the Velkari diplomatic community, a warm endorsement. I reread the entry from day 247 yesterday. The one where I said I am definitely fine. I was not at that time fine. I was exhausted and confused and standing in a corridor, trying to figure out how a protein bar joke had restructured my entire career trajectory and introduced a variable into my life that I had absolutely no framework for. I am now actually fine. Better than fine, probably. Though that's harder to write without sounding like I know more than I do, and I've spent enough time with someone who means everything she says to be careful about the precision of my own words. Here's what I know. I know that 6 months into the liaison position, the princess conducted her dawn ceremony for the first time in years. She told me about it the morning after. Not in detail, it was a private thing, but she mentioned it. She said it had gone well. She said she'd needed 2 attempts to remember the correct order of the vessels. I know that Korvath, who was not warm by anyone's definition of the word, once spent 20 minutes explaining the history of a specific piece of Velkari ceremonial history that he knew I'd been trying to understand from secondary sources, simply because he'd noticed I was struggling with it. He didn't mention that he was doing a kind thing. He just did it. I know that Lysa Akhafer is now the core primary expert on Velkari cultural interaction protocols, and that she is extremely good at it, and that she will never, if you ask her, admit that she finds any of it interesting. She finds all of it interesting. I know that Brendan Chow asked, about 4 months in, if he could transfer to the liaison team. He's been with us since month 5. He still thinks the Virath navigation marks are beautiful. He's probably right. I know that the Galactic Council's legal division did not sleep well for approximately 8 months while they worked through the jurisdictional implications of the liaison position, and that the framework they eventually produced was, I was told, actually quite elegant, and that 3 of the legal team members who worked on it were later recruited by the treaty office. And I know that every evening, in whatever space we're in, because the position means traveling now meeting, being present in rooms where decisions happen, there are 2 cups on the table. One terrible, in whatever version of coffee the local station or ship or diplomatic facility can produce. One equally terrible, because she maintains that the ritual is in the sameness, not the quality. We have a lot of conversations over those cups, about the Velkari history that I'm still learning, about the human customs that she finds genuinely fascinating in a way that is always specific. Not humans are interesting in a general diplomatic sense, but you specifically, this specifically, why do you do this particular thing in the precise, focused way of someone who actually wants to know? About what we expected our lives to look like and how they actually do. About the difference between the role and the self and whether you can have both. About all the things that are still ahead of us, which are numerous and complicated, and I'm increasingly certain, probably wonderful. I'm transferring tomorrow to the Velkari's primary diplomatic vessel. Not permanently. The liaison position maintains my core standing, maintains my human legal status, maintains all the independence that she built in from the beginning. But the claim period runs and the conversations continue, and apparently the universe, or at least a specific 700-year-old representative of the universe, is patient. I told her once a few months in, you know, if you just introduced yourself in the bay, we would have talked. She looked at me with those silver eyes that I've spent months learning to read. Yes, she said, but you would have been performing. I thought about that. So would you, I said. Yes, she agreed. And this way, she said quietly, we both started from the real version. I thought about a man in a docking bay, tired and cold, throwing his arms open to an empty room. Not empty, it turned out. Never quite as empty as it feels. You want me to give you the takeaway, the lesson, the thing people are supposed to walk away with? I'll try. There's a reason we make jokes about the things we want most. It's not weakness, it's protection. You put the real thing inside the joke, and if nobody catches it, the real thing was never exposed. Safe, contained, nobody saw. But that cuts both ways. If the joke works, if it's funny enough, loud enough, carries enough of the actual feeling wrapped up inside it, then somebody might hear it. Really hear it. And then you're standing in a docking bay with your arms out, and a 700-year-old vampire princess is looking at you across 40 meters of recycled station air. And she is not laughing at the joke. She is recognizing the thing inside it. And you have two choices. You can spend the next week or month or year trying to explain away what she heard, correcting the record, making it smaller, safer. Or you can say, okay, you heard something real, here is the real thing, let's start there. The galaxy is very big. I know that sounds obvious, but I mean it in a specific way. It is very big and very old and full of beings who have been around long enough to learn to be very careful, who have learned that showing the real thing is the thing that costs you most. So they perform. We perform, all of us. Every species, every diplomatic exchange, every carefully prepared statement. And then sometimes, very rarely, statistically improbably, in the specific atmospheric conditions of a recycled air docking bay at the end of a 12-hour shift, somebody forgets to perform.